Good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone tuning in from all over the world. For those watching the recording on YouTube later, we are so glad to have you as well to support and hype up Empowering Med's first event, an interview and Q&A session with Hannah Keime from Heartcharged. But before we start, I will be briefly introducing our guest and a little about her background. Hannah is currently studying film at Full Sail University. After school, she plans to continue to use her education and passion to share with the world what life as a young person with a life-threatening condition means, along with what a real threat sudden cardiac arrest is to young people and how we can end it. It is truly an amazing cause, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. In high school, she was by all means an active student. She played varsity basketball, participated in dance programs, and many other activities that greatly enhanced her high school life. It was only when she went in for a heart screening because a relative was diagnosed with a heart condition that this life that she had created shattered. When she was younger, Hannah fainted a few times. She's had multiple episodes of chest discomfort and irregular heartbeats, also known as arrhythmias. When she told her pediatrician about her symptoms, he osculated her heart and claimed that it was perfectly normal. It was not. In fact, she had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a heart disorder where the heart walls thicken, which in turn affects its function. There are warning signs, but oftentimes the first symptom is death due to sudden cardiac arrest. A year after diagnosis, she was qualified for the implantation of a defibrillator. In the interview later, she will be telling us how that defibrillator has saved her life on multiple occasions. But think for a second what it might mean as a high school student to know the moment you could have died and to experience what escaping death in front of an audience feels like. With great gratitude for being a survivor, she advocates fiercely for youth heart screenings and awareness, as well as training to knock out sudden cardiac death. With her sister, she has built a large network of others impacted by heart conditions where they do what medical professionals often cannot, which is related to one another from patient to patient. We are so glad to have her here today to share her story, her experience, and ultimately her views on how this condition has sparked her journey as an advocate for youth heart screenings. Welcome, Hannah. Anyway, without further ado, let's dive straight into today's interview. There will be a Q&A session afterwards for the audience to ask any questions they might have, but for now, my first question to you is, can you tell us a little bit about what a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or otherwise known as HCM, is?
Yeah, well, reason why it's called HCM because hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is a mouthful, and that's probably like the only two big words I know in my vocabulary. But so if we broke down the word hypertrophic, that means like over and beyond growth. And then obviously cardiomyopathy, as we're all aware, deals with heart condition. And so it's a genetic heart condition. And so it deals all the way back into your DNA, in which the gene that affects the growth of that controls the growth of your heart muscle is mutated and messed up, and so it doesn't get controlled, so your muscle in the sense keeps growing. Obviously there's a point where it stops, but in everyone it's kind of different how it presents itself, and how much it will grow. But if you were to get diagnosed, basically you would most likely see in an echocardiogram where they can really measure the thickness of your muscle, and they would be able to, a normal heart muscle is usually about 11 millimeters. And just to kind of give you perspective, when I was first diagnosed, it was double that. It was 22 millimeters. So it was pretty obvious that I had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. My cardiologist was even able to tell just listening to my heart and looking at my electrocardiogram and my heartbeat, that there was something wrong. But because your heart muscle is so thick and also your fibers in your heart aren't aligned, your heart muscle overworks. which is crazy. So it's basically I have too good of a heart and too big of a heart, which figuratively everyone's always like, oh, you have such a big heart, that's so great. But medically, that's not good for you. And so your heart muscle overworks. And it can also lead to having obstructive where your growth is. If it's too growth, it affects the blood flow, and that's where things get pretty serious and can affect you a lot more, whether you faint more or you would need a heart transplant and things like that. And so your your heart muscle works too good and too big, and a lot of, since there's no cure, a lot of the treatment is taking beta blockers, and then as well being able to have an implanted defibrillator, because it's over thick and it works too much. That means in your heart has a lot more arrhythmias. And so due to my condition, I also have ventricular tachycardia, just which means I got wacky heart beating my ventricular. And so because of that, if there's a lot of those, um, my doctor, and because of the thickness of my heart, my doctor was like, okay, we're gonna put a defibrillator in you. So if your heart does beat out of whack for too long, I won't be nervous that you would die. I know that you would be saved by a defibrillator, which it has saved my life twice. So it's well worth the amount of money my parents paid for. But yeah, that's kind of a bit of the rundown there.
Thank you, Hannah, for that detailed information. I guess that leads to the second question of how you're diagnosed. I'm sure your audience has heard a little about your diagnosis in the introduction, but what is it that you remember the most when you first received your diagnosis?
Um, what I remember most, I remember that day pretty well, because it literally changed my life. So it's not a day that I'm gonna forget for sure. But so because I said it was a genetic heart condition, um, probably earlier that year, so I was diagnosed in 2013, and I was just a freshman entering high school. And because obviously we found out earlier that year that my aunt had it, which she had actually had like a valve replacement. So she's had open heart surgery, and she got diagnosed with HCM. And they told her like, oh, with your condition. And then she found out, oh, she has a heart condition, which is crazy. You would think that they would have caught that earlier on. And so obviously she did the research, and when you do the research for HCM, you find out that it's the number one cause of student athletes. So when students just drop dead, it's usually because they had an undiagnosed heart condition, and it's usually HCM. And so, and she found out it was genetic. And so she told my mom immediately, because I have 8 siblings. So there's a lot of kids in my family. So there's pretty good ratio chance that one of us also has this heart condition. And so she told my mom to have us all get checked. And my mom actually had a very strong feeling to have me out of all my siblings get checked first. I had like a few fainting episodes when I was in 8th grade. So just like prior, like that year leading up. So she kind of was like, let me just see. I have a feeling to get her checked. And obviously, with a good pediatric cardiologist, it took like well over 6 months to get an appointment, especially the fact that I didn't have like, you know, any, I didn't have like, oh, she's fainted, like we need to get her seen. It was kind of like, oh, we're just checking out to see if she has, a condition. So there wasn't really any like rush to go in. And so September 13th, I had the appointment, and even leading up. Um, so I'm a religious person. I was like praying and stuff, and I couldn't even pray that I wouldn't have it. Like I couldn't finish those prayers. Like I just felt that I had something wrong. Obviously, I didn't know to what extent. So when I go in there and I do, the EKG, I do the echo, which was a bit long. It's not the usual 20 minutes. It was probably like a good 40 minutes in there. Um, and I go into the office, and my pediatric cardiologist, Dr. Moss at the time, she sits me down with my mom, and she tells me, yes, you have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and you have it pretty severe. And what that means is that you can no longer play any strenuous or adrenaline based activities. And 6 months prior, I was literally playing basketball on two teams, on a co-ed and on a girls' varsity. And I was dancing at school and I was dancing at a studio that we competed. So I did competition. And my doctor literally told me after she diagnosed me, she's like, "Oh, was my poker face good? Because when you were telling me how active you were, I was surprised that you had not dropped dead. Because with how thick your heart is and how severe your condition is, that is very surprising." And so that kind of all hit me because it wasn't like, okay, we're gonna do like a stress test, which is what they do when you like run on the treadmill to see really your physical activity with your heart. They were like, no, we're not doing any of that. We're just gonna cut to the chase. You shouldn't do anything that will get your heartbeat, racing or crazy. And we're gonna start you on a decent amount of beta blockers right away and get that figured out and put a heart monitor on you to really see, when your heart, has skipped beats or different things like that. But immediately I was told I had to stop most all physical activity. And as someone who had, dreams in that area and who had just started, freshman year, completely flipped, and trying to figure out who I am. And now with this diagnosis, how that's going to affect who I want to be and, what my goals are for after high school and such.
Thank you. That does sound life-changing, especially at such a young age. Would you say that your support system has played an important role in the days after your diagnosis?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, my support system has always been really my family. And so actually, because which helped that the first person had HCM, it kind of put pressure on to get the rest of my family checked. And so my older sister, Bethany, who is the other co-founder of Heartcharged, she found out that she had HCM as well, and also my mom. So it was crazy to find out that we all had it, and especially like my mom, who had gone into like the ER for like, you know, heart problems, like high blood pressure, things like that, and how it had been missed. And because my sister, so she was 17, I was 14 when I got diagnosed, being able to have her, even though she had not as severe, she was able to still dance and be active, but to be able to know that somebody, else had it. Because it's 1 in 500 people have it, HCM in the United States. But it was nice to have someone. And because we had each other, we knew how important what that meant. Um, so that's why we really created Heartcharged, which has only been around for a little bit over a year. We finally decided to make an account where we could offer that support system to other people, especially young people, because a lot of people think heart problems are just old people problems, and you tell people like, oh, I have a heart condition, or like for me, I'm 22 years old, and when I take more than a flight of stairs at like a fast pace, I get winded. And you would think like, oh no, you're just out of shape, or things like that. I look healthy, I look normal. But no, I have, a killer heart condition, and have to take it easy. And so we kind of really wanted that support system, especially for young people, to know that they aren't alone, that there are people out there and people who understand it and people who are their age. Because obviously sometimes like when you're a teen and you're kind of like, when old people are like, well, back in my day, it's like, okay, I want to talk to somebody who's like young and who's been through this and, who can talk about, the mental health side of it, or, the side of getting a defibrillator and what that looks like for your body image and the struggles like that. And so that's really why we created Heart Charge, to be able to have that support system for more people like us, because we knew how important it was to at least know that there was one other person out there who knew what you were going through when no one else did.
Thank, thank you, Hannah. All right, so that brings us to the amazing organization that you created with your sister. Anyways, when did you start realizing that you needed to do something to advocate for early heart screening?
That's a great question. So actually, um, when I first got diagnosed, I was taking, I mean, I was one of those kids who like graduated with like 1,500 community service hours. Like I was one of those people who's like being active in my community. I would do a lot of like political campaigns. Like ever since I was like 6, like I was one of those kids who's active like that. And I enjoyed like public speaking. I enjoyed doing performing arts, but I was taking a speech and debate class, so it gave me time to do like speeches on things. And obviously, the one thing that was like boggling my mind and that I was doing a lot of research on was HCM, and young people with it, especially the student athletes who drop dead. And when I'm finding this out, and I find out that these kids' deaths could have been prevented by a simple heart screening, by an EKG, which literally takes maybe like 6 minutes to do. And it would be basically be like a 15-minute appointment if you just went in to do an EKG, that those kids' lives could be saved. And then realizing that I would have been one of those kids if I didn't get diagnosed, it really pushed me to advocate because, you know, most of those kids are dead. They can't advocate for themselves. And I felt lucky enough to be alive. And so I wanted, what am I going to use this life for? Obviously, I've been saved, so I got to do something good. I got to make it worthwhile. And so immediately I started just pushing, talking to legislators, talking to literally anybody who would listen to me, doing presentations in my school and other schools, at community events, just sharing my story and how important it was to get a heart screening, to know, to be safe, to see if you had this condition or if you had another heart condition, because, like mentioned, it's asymptomatic. So they say, like, obviously, if you have fainting episodes or if you have shortness of breath or things like that, that you should go see a doctor. But isn't really any like, with COVID, when everyone's like, okay, but if you lose, your taste, like that's really a key like you should definitely, you probably have COVID. With HCM, there isn't anything like that where it's like, okay, if you've, that you probably have, a cardiomyopathy. It's mostly the generic ones that are mostly put in symptoms for things. And so it was pushed to like do it. And so we basically kept advocating, and then luckily this year a bill got passed in Florida, which is the state I'm from in the United States, to have CPR training classes, for high school students. So that was a big deal, obviously, because since we can't control, when people do, at least the help is we can help prevent it. We're still trying to push for heart screenings to be mandatory, but surprisingly, there's some pushback on it from other people. But yeah, ever since being diagnosed and realizing that this was an issue that no one was talking about, that I felt it was my need to at least warn people and tell people so that they wouldn't have to lose a child or, be at risk of it, that they could know and they could be safe. I mean, I wanted people not to have it, so I'd always end my speeches like, hey, I hope none of you have a condition, but I want you to know that if you do, then I'm right here with you and that I'll be here for you if you do. Because that's the scary thing about getting a diagnosis, is thinking that nobody understands you. So still offering that support system early on to know people wouldn't be alone, and that the struggle may be a little bit easier because someone was there who knew what it was like.
Thank you, Hannah. So is this the main inspiration behind Heartcharged then?
Yeah, so the main inspiration behind Heart Charge is really to offer that patient to patient support, is to let people know that they're not alone, and to let people, because really with this heart condition, with this diagnosis, and a lot of like serious, like this is a chronic illness, this is a disability. And but it doesn't mean when you get diagnosed that you are set in that condition of diagnosis, if that makes any sense. It's progressively gets better, progressively gets worse. Some days it's good, some days it's bad. And so this journey is a bit of a crazy roller coaster because for me, I get diagnosed and I have a severe condition, and then just a year later, my heart muscle grows a big amount, which is almost like 30 millimeters. So it was growing fast, which I'm assuming because of puberty, and obviously as my body's growing, of course, my heart would grow. And so, like, even though, okay, this is how I was there, just a year later, it's like different. And then, a year later, okay, it stayed, okay, but now a year later, your body's storing water and you're having more heart failure. And then, oh, now you can be eligible for a heart transplant, and we want to consider that. And so there's so much happening, so much going on that you do need people who have been through it to kind of know to get that opinion because when I ask my doctors, of course they're telling me from a medical point of view of like research of years of school, but I want to ask questions like, okay, what is it like to wear a bikini when I have my defibrillator, or like what is it like to like after you do, how does it really feel? Like to be able to have those people who can answer those questions, or at least give me like a point of view so that I know what to expect. Or like if I'm knowing like, hey, I'm gonna be blunt and honest with you, like it hurts, like or this and that, or that medication for me has been a bit hard to take, or things like that, to know that someone understands you. Because doctors, they get it, but also because they're pushing you to like be on your medication. I want to talk with somebody who's like, oh my gosh, it was so hard to swallow those giant pills. Like, I completely understand you, because you want to be heard, you want to be understood when you see a doctor and know like, okay, like I mean any of us want to be seen and heard. And so being able to offer this community where you could do that, where you can complain about taking meds, or talk about how powerful a hit it is when you get shocked by a defibrillator, really feeling like you have a place somewhere, and that you aren't that weird person out who's been through all this crazy stuff, that there are people there who get it.
Thank you, Hannah. That definitely makes sense. And I do agree that talking to a doctor is so different than talking to someone who actually gets your experience. So, what about learning about HCM? It is incredibly important, and I'm sure you'd agree with this as well. What does the role of the government play in this issue? Would you say they're doing enough in terms of educating the public about HCM or other heart conditions?
No. Yeah, no. Um, yeah, it's still no, the government, again, even so it's even interesting. American Heart Association, I'm just gonna call them out because I don't think anyone here is I mean, even if they were, I'll talk to them bluntly. So the American Heart Association has a thing called Jump Rope for Heart, which is like I did it when I was younger. I mean, people like for heart health, right? Where they're like, be active and help people who, like older people to have, health issues and stuff. And so I did it. I literally was jump roping for heart with with a condition, an underlying heart condition I was unaware of at the moment. But I'm jump roping, which is something I cannot do now with this condition. So basically, the American Heart Association is like trying to kill me, having me jump rope for my heart when technically I should not be doing that. But the American Heart Association, even themselves, does not put enough funding in advocating and researching about congenital heart disease, about us. And a lot of people in the heart community, when we, talk about it, we discuss like, yeah, it's crazy to think, because they push so much about like oh, being overweight and being, doing that heart health. And people are like, oh, even though same for us, like drink more water, like anybody like, yeah, you should be drinking more water, but it's like that simple, everyone's heard heart health. But it's like, what about us? What about us people who doesn't matter what we eat, doesn't matter, what we do. Like, I will always have this heart condition. Like, that's just a fact. It doesn't matter, how I deal with it. There's nothing that can change the fact that I have an enlarged heart. So the government does not, and even passing bills, like I said, there's been pushback because people are like, oh, false positives. But now the research has been more in our favor to show. But for me, as someone who knows the time and date of when they would have died, to me, as someone like that, where it is a personal issue, is I don't want anyone to go through that. I don't want anyone to lose their life, and I don't care if it's just one person, to save it. But obviously, not everyone understands that gravitas of like, hey, all this funding, like, even if we save one life, it's worth it. That's one person. Like, we should be able to, realize that this community, because even in this heart community, we feel like unseen as these young people with heart conditions. Like, even in media, for instance, like me in film, is I want to be able to tell these stories in a medium where a lot of people are seeing it, so it becomes like a social norm. It becomes something we talk about. Like, the number one killer of women is heart disease, but nobody talks about that. But people do talk about breast cancer and all these different things. But heart disease for young people actually kills more than cancer. There's a statistic that shows it combined all these, like, child cancer, all these different things, yet sudden cardiac arrest kills more than all of that. Sudden cardiac arrest took as many people as COVID did in the first year. Every year it takes that amount of people, 350,000 people in the United States, and yet no one is talking about that. Everyone kind of just almost in a sense like ignores it. And so we are trying our best to kind of bring that to it. And that's why our community is not only for heart patients, but allies of the heart community, to be able to bring that, to let them know, like, hey, if you feel any symptoms or if you know anyone, like, make sure that they get checked, but also, like, let this be part of the conversation that, there's heart conditions out there for people. Because, yeah, the long story short, the government is not doing enough, and we need to discuss it more because it's not something people discuss enough, especially with how many people it takes, lives it takes. We should be way, way more doing more things for it, for sure. And that's my rant, sorry.
That's so crazy. One would assume that the healthcare department and the government would be doing more because heart disease is one of the most prevalent causes of death, not only in the United States, but all around the world. It is definitely eye opening for us to know that it is fact otherwise. So, what steps do you want the government to take?
I mean, if we could have it our way, we would want the government. For instance, I think, like you said, worldwide, that's the beautiful thing about our community as well, is to seeing that this is not something that just affects one country. This is not something that affects one gender, one race, one ethnicity. This literally affects everyone, and it affects everyone the same way, too. That, like, sudden cardiac arrest or heart conditions don't really care how much money you make, what your favorite TV show is. It's going to come for you. You can have it. But we would really like to have mandatory heart screenings. Because, take for instance, especially done through like the school, because obviously, like, low income housings, like, people can't afford insurance, and it's tough. But we, like, in the United States, we have scoliosis testing, we have hearing testing, we have sight testing, we have vaccines. We have to get, like, polio vaccine, different things like that, chicken, and we're talking about an organ that literally is like the most vital organ in your body. Why aren't we having a screening for that? You know, if we're having a screening about scoliosis, about your back, okay, why can't we have a screening for your heart to make sure everything's good and everything's well with it? And so we would like to have mandatory heart screenings for people and have them honestly like every 2 years, because, like, for me, maybe if I had gotten diagnosed when I was in like 6 or 7, it wouldn't have been as severe as when I got diagnosed later on, as you could tell, like it was growing. So obviously, like doing screenings, but keeping them up, not just like a one-time screening, one and done. Because sometimes cardiomyopathy presents itself later in life too, which is something. So being able to have screenings done for people, and it's and they're affordable. Like the funding is there if they were to do it, but there's never enough money or things like that, and there's not as many false positives anymore for the screening. And honestly, we have tagged along and done screenings with other organizations. They're super quick. Like people can easily get to just place the EKG, do it, like anyone can learn. Obviously, you would need like a cardiologist, like someone who knows what they're looking at and reading to diagnose you. So that's the important part too, that it's not just some like, random volunteer that's reading it, but that there's actual doctors reading it and doing it. And then if something, pops up, then they have them come in for further testing. And people complain too because they go like, which actually happened when they tried to push through years ago, is they had like people, oh, actually, no, it was in another state. Someone like sued, which is so annoying. Someone sued like the school or something who had put on these heart screenings, and the kid had been like flagged or whatever, and they were upset because the kid couldn't play sports, or he had to wait to play sports while they were like doing the testing and all that, and like that's his whole life to play sports and da 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 da. I'm like, as someone who has played sports and thought about pursuing sports and stuff like that, like it's not your whole life. Like, and that's a hard reality to face when you have dreams and aspirations and they get, you know, deleted in a moment's notice just by a simple diagnosis. But it's like that's not your whole life, and that's also a big thing that we try to push is like one, your heart condition doesn't define you, but it doesn't mean you can't have a life because you have it. Like there's other things that you can do. Just for instance, like sports isn't your whole life, and it was so like upsetting to hear that, because I don't know if the kid ended up having like, it wasn't as severe, but that he had wasted that time just, waiting when he could have been playing sports. But it's like, well, wouldn't you have rather known? What if he was out there, or like what if he did have it and you let him play and he dropped dead? Like you wouldn't live that down. Like that's really hard. So it's like you have to be patient with this, and like you want the best results, and sometimes that's going to take time. Because for me, my appointment was super long. I think I was there like literally the whole day. And yeah, I could have been doing things, but this was something important to make sure that, there was nothing wrong. But people be people, and yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. You bring up valid points. I definitely agree that heart screening being part of school or PE or another class would definitely help prevent and save a lot of lives. What are some of your future plans regarding Heart Charge?
Yeah, so regarding Heartcharged, our future plans is, so luckily we were able to get a grant to do one of the projects that's our welcome care packages, because to be able to just have simple physical like representation for people to know that they're part of a community, not only helps for them to be like, yo, look, I have like this cool hard charged hat, or like I have like these stickers on my water bottle, and it's a reminder like, hey, if I'm having a bad day, I can look and look at my water bottle and know like, hey, like people have also been through this as well. Or like, hey, if they wanted to reach out and message us and talk about like, oh, like my scars like itchy, or like, ooh, have you ever had like that tight chest pain, like that there's people out there. And also like a way for people kind of to be proud of who you are, because a lot of people actually hide that they have a heart condition because it's easy to, but they're scared because they say it, then people, treat them differently, or, react in a way or try to baby them or different things like that. And so that's kind of hard. And so that we want people to know that they can be, proud in who it is. So that's a project that we're continuing to doing, and definitely Once COVID passed, we really want to like go into the hospitals and see those kids who are like us, you know, laying in the PICU after they've gotten a defibrillator implanted. And we definitely want to travel worldwide. As seeing like making all these heart charged friends from around the world to be able to know and also learn from other countries. Like, for instance, Italy is like an amazing country and is really at the forefront for not only advocating but doing their part in having mandatory heart screenings and such, but learning from other countries, but also helping like anyone we can to know and to help people reach as many people as we can to know that they have a community out there. And then as well, we're pushing to again for legislation to be able to. We're focusing on making a is what they call at the school kind of like a a plan if like someone were to go unconscious and they would need CPR and AD, make sure that the school is prepared for that, and every school is prepared for that, not only in Florida but nationally. So that's something on our thing as well. But and then right now we have our bringing back our Get Heart Charge challenge to just teach people one how easy and important CPR is and using an AED, because a lot of people get scared, but they shouldn't be, and that they'll be able to, like AEDs are so smart now, like the automatic external defibrillators, that they'll show you on the screen how to put the pads on and that it's not nervous, and just kind of like breaking down those myths that people have about it and about heart conditions is kind of something that we continue to do.
That's really inspirational, and definitely kudos to you for standing up to educate the youth and for sharing your experience with so many individuals. I'm sure many of us here are motivated by your strength and resilience.